All right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, we're going to continue our discussion on scales and modes, and we are going to be diving in once again into the Mixolydian mode. This is part 2 of the series, so if you haven't seen the first part, definitely go check it out. But if you're familiar with scales at this point, you can dive into this video without a problem. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into review really quick. Mixolydian is the 5th degree of the scale, or the 5th mode, right? And so here it happens to be G. So we're just going to start counting our whole steps and half steps from our 5th position, or our 5th degree. And so we're going to start with that whole step immediately following G. So we're moving from the Ionian mode of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And now we're moving into Mixolydian, which gives us the pattern whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, right? And we looked at that in the first part of the video. Furthermore, in the first part of the video, we verified that it was indeed a major scale. And we did that by evaluating the 3rd degree of the scale, which in this case is B. And we know that we had 4 frets from the 1st to the 3rd. So we had the major 3rd. So therefore, Mixolydian is a major mode because we have a major 3rd, okay? Now, as we look at these two patterns for the Ionian and Mixolydian, we know they're both major, so we can compare them one for one, no problem. And we can see pretty much instantly where the derivative is between these two scales, right? So in Ionian, our 6th interval is a whole step. In Mixolydian, our 6th interval is a half step. Right? Now, that's gonna affect some things. And as we're comparing C Ionian, or C major at the top, to C Mixolydian down at the bottom, we know that we have to adjust for that half step, and that's going to affect our 7th degree of the scale. And how is that going to affect us? Well, we have a half step that we need to account for, which means we need to take that B and make it a flattened 7th, right? Don't worry about the diminished part right now. As we've spoken about, B diminished represents the chord, and I'm leaving that there now for a reason. But we had to flatten the note from B to B flat for the Mixolydian scale, okay? So previously we spoke about, what it looks like from a scale perspective to one note change really starts to impact a lot of, kind of downstream effects, if you will. And here, that downstream effect is going to be on our 7th degree. That's where it starts, and then it just circles through the entire scale. Now here, one of the things I want to point out, we talked in the previous video about properly labeling our notes in the scales. And here we talked about the lowercase Roman numerals represent minors and the uppercase represent major chords, right? So at the top we have a minor, which means B has a minor 3rd, and then we have a diminished, right? And down at the bottom we just have the all uppercase, which means we have a major, which means in this case we can look very quickly and realize that we have a B flat major in Mixolydian. So one of the things that this gives us an opportunity to do, because we've spoken so many times about there's no B diminished note, there's only a B diminished or any diminished chord, right? So that allows us to kind of clean up some of the symbols that we're using, right? Now we have a very clear idea when we're looking at Ionian at the top that we have a 7th as a diminished chord, and incidentally the 7th note is B. So we can much more clearly see that we just have a flattened 7th as a note. And as we looked at in the last video, we understand why we have a B diminished in Ionian at the top and why we have a B flat major in Mixolydian down at the bottom. So with that being said, I want to continue that conversation. Now here, we're going to have a conversation about what are the effects of this lowered 7th, right? We flattened the 7th note. What are the effects of that actually going to be on our scale? Well, It doesn't really affect any other notes as we're looking at this, right? The C, the D, the E, the F, G, A, they all pretty much stayed the same. So if you just look at this and you go, okay, who cares? I have a flattened seventh. What effect does that have on the scale? Well, it affects the chords. It doesn't affect the notes in the scale necessarily. There are others that will, but here we have an effect on which chords we're ultimately going to be able to produce from the scale now that we have that flattened seventh, okay? So that's what I want to go ahead and dive into here. When we are talking about these chords are going to be evaluated based off the first, the third, and the fifth of each chord. Now, these are really the very basic chords. They're called triads because there's only 3 notes, the first, the third, and the fifth, okay? We use the third, just like we do with the scales, to determine whether or not the chord is major or minor. And then we use the fifth, perfect fifths, we have straight up major or minors. When we have diminished fifths with minor thirds, we have diminished, right? And that's what we talked about in the first part of this video. But anyways, the chords that we need to evaluate for this to understand what the effects of that flattened seventh have, we need to look at the first, the third, and the fifth at each degree in the scale. And that will make more sense here in a second. So that means if we're looking back over at the fretboard, we're not worried about the minor or major seconds. We're worried about the minor or major thirds. And we're worried about the perfect fifth, which means we're not worried about the perfect fourth at all. And in fact, we're not worried about an augmented fourth or a diminished fourth or a perfect fourth. We're not worried about the fourths at all for the time being. And the only time that we're really interested in the tritone is when we're going to be looking at it from a diminished fifth perspective, right? So again, it brings us right back to we're only worried about the thirds, the first, the thirds, and the fifths. Now, the one thing I want to bring up, just because in case somebody brings it up to you, triads can sometimes have augmented fifths. We're not going to run into them here, so I'm not going to talk about them a whole lot, but I wanted to bring it up just in case somebody brings it up to you that says, oh, triads can have augmented fifths. They can. We're just not going to run into them here, and I'm putting that out for a later video. So all that being said, we're going to just be dealing with kind of your standard triads, dealing with our first, our thirds, and our fifths. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into evaluating the first degree of the scale. And all the first degree of the scale is just the tonic, right? It's the first degree. And what we're going to do is evaluate the third and the fifth, the first, the third, and the fifth. In this case, our first happens to be C. The third of C is an E, and the fifth of C is a G. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out what we are going to be looking at for our third. And here we can see that we have a whole step followed by another whole step. So we've moved up 4 frets, meaning we have a major third. Okay. Then from there, we need to get out to our fifth. And so we can see that we have a half step followed by a whole step, which is 3 more frets, which means to get to our fifth, in this case G, we've moved up a perfect fifth. So therefore, we have a major third and a perfect fifth, which gives the first degree of the Ionian as well as the Mixolydian mode. Both of them have a major chord as the first degree. Now let's evaluate the second degree of the scale, in this case D, right? So we have D, then the third is F, and then A, right? The fifth of D is A. The third of D is F. So going to look at our third, we have a whole step followed by a half step, and that's 3 frets, so therefore we have a minor third. And then to get to the fifth, that's followed by 2 more whole steps or 4 more frets, which gives us a perfect fifth, meaning that the second degree in both Ionian as well as Mixolydian is a minor chord, okay? Now, let's evaluate the third degree. In this case, E, and we can see at the fifth here, right, being B, right, the fifth of E is a B, we can see that we're going to probably hit something in Mixolydian because we have that lowered seventh. So let's find out what that means for us. Well, first we need to evaluate the third. So from E to G, we've moved up 3 frets, which is a minor third. Okay. So from there, we need to evaluate how we get to our 5th. Excuse me. Here, when we move from G to B in Ionian versus G to B flat in Mixolydian, we have a derivative here, right? Something's changed. Well, G to A is still a whole step in both of them, so no problem there. But A to B in Ionian is a whole step, whereas A to B flat in Mixolydian is a half step. So what does that mean for us? Well, that whole step in Ionian means that we've moved from E to B and that we've moved up 7 frets. And so therefore, that's a perfect 5th. And that means we have a minor third and a perfect 5th, which makes E, or the 3rd degree in Ionian, a minor chord, E minor, okay? However, in Mixolydian, we don't have that. Instead, in Mixolydian, from A to B flat is a half step. So if we go from E to B flat, we've only moved up 6 frets. That's not a perfect 5th. That means that 6 frets is actually a diminished 5th. So from E to B flat is a diminished 5th. And what do we know about a minor 3rd and a diminished 5th? Well, that gives us a diminished chord. Therefore, in Mixolydian, our 3rd degree is a diminished chord. Now, this is huge because throughout this entire conversation about our modes, we've always looked at the 3rd to determine if our scale is major or minor. So that just talks about how important the 3rd really is. Now, E, no matter how you look at it, is still 4 frets from C. So from our 1st to our 3rd, the distance is still going to be a major 3rd. That's fine. But the chord, the quality of that chord is diminished. And what that means for us is if we're looking at a chord progression in our music, in Ionian, let's say we went, we did a C major, an E minor, and a G major. That's gonna epitomize everything about Ionian because we're pinging in on the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th. And we talked about diminished are kind of off limits to us. So all of a sudden, when we're playing chord progressions, all of a sudden that our 3rd in Mixolydian almost became off limits to us. At best, it's something that we have to use very, very cautiously. So that makes a difference in the sound of the music that you're going to get out of Mixolydian. Is that 3rd all of a sudden isn't so easy to use, and that 3rd being critical, a majorly critical interval that's going to affect the way that your music comes across. So I wanted to point that out because it does make this a little bit interesting. So from here, we're just going to kind of reset our intervals on the left-hand side of the screen. And now we are going to look at the 4th degree of the scale. In this case, happens to be F. And here we have the B flat kind of fits in there, but let's find out what kind of impact it really has on us. Okay, so from F to A in both Ionian and Mixolydian is a whole step followed by a whole step, so it's a major 3rd. Okay. Now, when we move from A to C, in Ionian, we have a whole step from A to B, and in Mixolydian, we have a half step from A to B flat. But B is our 4th, right? A is our 3rd, C is our 5th, B is our 4th. And we talked about it earlier. We don't care if it's an augmented 4th or a perfect 4th or a diminished 4th. 4ths we're just not interested in right now, so no real impact. Next, we have a half step in Ionian from B to C, but we have a whole step from B flat to C. Now, what's important to look at here is from A to C, in both Ionian as well as Mixolydian, it's still 3 frets. They might be reordered, right? In Ionian, we do a whole step, half step, and in Mixolydian, we do a half step, whole step. But from A to C, it's still 3 frets, right? We already have a major 3rd, so we only move up 3 more frets, which gives us a perfect 5th. And what do we know? We got a major 3rd and a perfect 5th. That's, that is a major chord, right? So F major is the same in both Ionian as well as Mixolydian. Now here, I just want to point out something, right? Remember the tonic and the octave, it's the same note. So, I could have written another D out to the right, and it would have been from C to D, it would have been a whole step and another, and so on and so forth. But as opposed to just writing this out endlessly, I'm just circling back. So I'm going to kind of dim the octave a little bit, so just for a visual kind of cue. And I'll use each one of these Cs as it's appropriate, but I want to just give everybody kind of a visual cue there, because it's going to matter here in a moment. So now we're looking at G. And from G to its third is different in Ionian versus Mixolydian. In Ionian, when we go from G to B, we have 2 whole steps. And when we look at G to B flat, in Mixolydian, we have a whole step followed by a half step. So that whole step in Ionian from A to B, that matters because the half step in Mixolydian, down at the bottom from A to B flat, that impacts our third, right? And so again, right off the bat, we're looking at this third. So because of the whole step from A to B in Ionian, that means from G to B gives us a major third in Ionian. But if we look down at the bottom, that half step, we only have 3 frets from G to B flat, which gives us a minor third. Okay, now that's going to be important to just keep in mind, right? Ionian, the 5th degree, in this case G, has a major third for its chord, but the 5th degree, in this case G again, in Mixolydian, has a minor third, in this case B flat. Now, from B to C, it's going to be a half step in Ionian at the top, and from B flat to C, it's going to be a whole step at Mixolydian down at the bottom. And really, that doesn't really matter to us anymore because it's a fourth, so we're not really worried about the fourths, right? We're just kind of moving on past the fourths. But we're just going to kind of come back around now, and now we're going to talk about from C to D, and that's a whole step. Well, that means from G to A to B, and then from B to C to D, right? D's our 5th. In both of them, we have 7 frets, right? Regardless, right? G to D in Ionian as well as Mixolydian is still a perfect 5th. The only difference was the third changed, right? The quality of the third for Ionian was a major third, and the quality for the third in Mixolydian, in this case, was a minor third. So therefore, the 5th degree of the scale in the Ionian mode is a major G major, and in Mixolydian, it's G minor, okay? So now, just to kind of finish this off, we need to look at and evaluate the 6th degree, in this case, A. So when we move out to our third, in Ionian, we have a whole step, and in Mixolydian, we have a half step, right? We're going from A to B or A to B flat. So that's interesting, but we're not really worried about our seconds, so whatever. But when we go from B to C, we have a half step in Ionian and a whole step in Mixolydian. Well, that's whatever. From A to C, no matter how you slice it, it's 3 frets. It might be reordered from whole step to half step in Ionian, but in Mixolydian, it's a half step to a whole step. So no matter what, it's still a minor third. Okay, cool. So we got A, the 6th degree, which is A, has a minor third. Now we go from C to D, and then to the 5th, D to E, right? So that's a whole step followed by a whole step. And so we had a minor third, and then we moved up 4 more frets, which gives us a perfect 5th, which means that the 6th degree in both Ionian as well as Mixolydian is minor, okay? So, with that being said, we can just quickly look and see what the difference between the two are, right? And here we see right off the bat in Ionian, the 3rd degree in Ionian is a minor, E minor, And the third degree in Mixolydian is a diminished chord, in this case E diminished. Furthermore, we can look over at G, or the fifth degree of the scale, and we see at the top it's a major at Ionian and it's a minor in Mixolydian. Okay? So the only thing that we spoke about in the only other change that we spoke about in the first video was that we obviously had a seventh as a diminished chord in Ionian. In this case it would have been B diminished. And we have a major chord as a seventh degree in Mixolydian, right? B flat major. So that's really, you know, when we're looking at it, we've evaluated the chords. This flattened seventh, that's kind of how it, you know, really works out for us. That's the major effect of it, right? We wind up with in the Mixolydian, we wind up with a diminished third and a minor fifth. Okay? So with all that being said, again, the Mixolydian mode, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. Let me make sure I got that right. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. And from here, we can once again kind of look at our chord qualities here: major, minor, diminished, major, minor, minor, major, and then we hit the octave back at major again. So therefore, Mixolydian has the flattened or lowered seventh, and this is the results of that. So with all that being said, one of the things I do want to point out is if you go to the website, there's a PDF that you can download under the resources tab. It's free. It comes out as PDF, printed out. I think it will help you work through some of the scales quite a bit. I think it will give you, you know, just practice is always better anyway. So go check it out. Check out the website. Download that PDF. Hopefully it helps you out. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions about that. And as always, everyone, thanks a lot for watching. Hopefully you're getting something out of these videos. And if you are, smash that subscribe. Really helps out the channel. You know, let me know down in the comments if you have any questions, what you might be looking forward to seeing in future videos. But with all that being said, again, really appreciate it, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video where we will finish off the discussion on the Mixolydian mode.